My name's Joel Sear, and I am loved. A fun fact about me is that I own technically 7 wheelchairs. I was born in Lethbridge. We lived in Pincher Creek for 2 years on a farm, and then we moved to Okotoks, Alberta, and I've lived there ever since. I am the youngest of 9 kids, and I technically wasn't supposed to be born. My mom she basically had a surgery so that she couldn't have kids anymore. And then after that, I was born. And I didn't find out about that until I was a teenager. But our family growing up was a really messed up one. All my older siblings, they got a lot of physical abuse from my dad. Some of them got whipped, some got beat with a pole. There were all these different things, and then when we had moved to Okotoks, the physical abuse went down a lot, so that us younger kids, the worst we got was a paddle. My dad, he was extremely hardcore, I guess Christian you could say, but it wasn't genuine Christianity. It was this very religious, abusive way where we weren't allowed to do all these different things. Just our whole family life was really terrible. There was a lot of emotional abuse, a lot of yelling. My parents owned a Boston Pizza, and they were always arguing and yelling about that. They ended up getting separated a bunch of times, but legally they got separated twice. And the first time was really hard for me, and up until this point, because of the way our family was, I had a lot of anxiety and insecurity within our own family and friends. And looking back, I did so many things that I didn't realize were just rooted in that insecurity. I became absolutely obsessed with video games, and my dad absolutely hated that. That was my life for so long. I was super anxious to do everything. I was incredibly anxious about my body. I always felt so ugly. I started smoking weed when I was 13, and around that time I became suicidal, and it got to the point where every time I would go home at nighttime before I was going to bed, I'd basically be literally crying myself to sleep every night, saying to God, how come nobody loves me? Yeah, my mom, after my parents got separated for the second time, she started taking me to a youth church on Monday nights, and she started forcing us to go to this church on Sunday mornings. And at the time, I hated going. I would fall asleep in the back row every single time. But then one day, this lady, she gave me what was called a youth Bible, and it was just the New Testament in easy to understand modern language. And I started reading it, and I got so sucked into it. It was like the words were just like jumping off the page at me, and I read all the Gospels, and by the time I was done reading, I just knew that I was going to hell. And so that same night, I asked my mom, I was like, Mom, I'm going to hell, what do I gotta do to be saved? And she just told me, Joel, just ask forgiveness for your sins, invite Jesus into your heart. And that's where it started for me, was just this trying not to go to hell. And slowly God was just working in my life, planting seeds. And then as I slowly got out of that suicidalness, although my issues hadn't been dealt with yet, God was still working in them, and I was trying to be obedient in certain areas, and I was getting really angry at God about the fact that I was still so depressed, and why wasn't I experiencing all these good things of God? Why wasn't I experiencing the love of God? Why wasn't I hearing His voice? I was at church one day, and I went to go get communion, and as I was there, I walked away from getting communion before taking it, and this lady came up to me afterwards and said I needed to go see her. And I started to go basically get spiritual counseling with her. Basically, God was speaking through her, telling me how much of these things were my own cause. And I just ended up basically asking God for forgiveness of those things. And to this day, I haven't struggled with depression anymore. For how I feel my identity is now, through believing what God has said about me and Him giving me encounters with Him where I've experienced that love, I have this new sense of feeling like I am God's son. I am an intentional creation. I am someone He wanted, and no matter how many mistakes I make, I know that He still loves me.